Lesson 8.4, Video 1. As mentioned in previous lessons, if we solve a quadratic function by graphing, the solutions are called x-intercepts. If we solve a quadratic function by factoring, the solutions are called zeros. If we solve a quadratic function by the quadratic formula, the answers are called roots. And this lesson begins the process towards using the quadratic formula. But again, these solutions using this method are called roots. So let's take a look at an example where we have one variable and it's typically squared, and we'll say equals 9. Now we all know that the square root of 9 is equal to 3, and that's true. The root of anything is a positive value. However, in this particular question right here, they're asking what squared gives you 9, and 3 squared gives you 9. However, negative 3 quantity squared also gives you 9. And that's important to know because the solution then to x squared equals 9 is found by a typical method we always use, which is undoing something when we're solving for a variable. So if we're going to undo a square, we square root, and we would write x equals, but not just 3, we have to say a plus or a minus 3, because we know that 3 squared is 9 and negative 3 quantity squared is 9. So two answers surface. And it's only because of the way the question is written. Unlike up here where they just asked for a calculation, here they have an equation and we have to solve for x. So if we look at some other examples here, we have a question that actually requires one more step. So we would add 4 to both sides first, because we can't undo a square unless it's isolated. And at that time, we can square root. So x is equal to, yes, 2, but because of the way the question is written, there are two possible answers, plus and minus 2. Now the next question, we have to add 25 to both sides, and we get x squared equals 25. And again, the way the question is written, when we rip both sides to solve, we have to represent both positive and negative 5. So above we have a little paragraph here that kind of puts it together for us. Once the x term is isolated, once the x squared term is isolated, we can root both sides. And remember that when we root both sides, we get two answers, a positive and a negative root. Now sometimes that number is not rootable. So if I had x squared plus 7 equals 0, I get x squared equals, let's do a minus here first. I would add 7 to both sides, I would root both sides, and I cannot root 7, and I'm not going to write a decimal, but I will write plus minus root 7. And when one last piece here, and I almost wrote it down there, and I'll write it here for sure. If I have a plus 7, and I subtract it from both sides, I get a negative 7. And when I root both sides, this is imaginary, an imaginary number, so at this point we would say can't do. We'll be able to do it later, but right now we'll say we cannot take the root of a negative number. If you try it on your calculator, it's going to give you an error. And this ends Lesson 8.4, Video 1.